I never thought I'd be sitting across from a loan officer watching my entire future collapse because of someone who was supposed to protect me. My credit score had plummeted to 480. I had $70,000 of debt I never agreed to, and my own mother had the audacity to tell me it was a little reminder to be grateful for everything she'd done for me. This is the story of how I discovered the betrayal, fought to reclaim my financial future, and learned that sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are with the people who raised you. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I'd always been the responsible one in my family. By 24, I had graduated college with minimal student loans, landed a decent entry-level position at a marketing firm in Chicago, and was finally feeling like I had my life together. My name is Melissa Wright, and I grew up in a small town outside of Indianapolis with my mother, Diane, and younger brother, Tyler. Mom raised us alone after my dad left when I was 8. Money was always tight, but she worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over our heads. I remember counting quarters with her at the kitchen table to pay the electric bill and watching her cry when she thought we were asleep. Those memories stayed with me, which is why I worked so hard to become financially stable. I didn't want to struggle the way she had. When I moved to Chicago after college, Mom seemed proud. She'd call weekly to check in, asking about my job and my tiny studio apartment that I was so proud of. But looking back, there were signs I should have noticed. The questions about my salary, the casual mention of my social security number for updating her emergency contacts, her sudden interest in my mail when she visited. I'd been in Chicago for about 2 years when everything fell apart. It started with a simple credit card application. I was at my local bank hoping to upgrade to a card with better travel rewards when the banker gave me a puzzled look. "Ms. Wright, your application has been denied." I was stunned. "That can't be right. I've never missed a payment on anything. According to your credit report, you have several delinquent accounts. Your score is currently 480. My heart dropped. A 480 credit score? That was impossible. I requested a copy of my credit report, hands shaking as I filled out the form. When I received it 3 days later, I felt physically ill. There they were, 5 credit cards I'd never applied for, all maxed out. A personal loan for $35,000. A car loan for a Toyota I'd never seen for $28,000. And all of them were in my name, with my social security number, most showing multiple missed payments. In total, over $70,000 of debt had been accumulated in my name. But the most sickening part? The address listed on all these accounts was my mother's house in Indiana. I called Mom immediately, my voice trembling as I asked, "Do you know anything about these accounts?" There was a long pause before she responded with a sigh that told me everything I needed to know. "Sweetie, I was going to tell you. Things have been so tough since you left." "You took out loans in my name?" My voice cracked. "Mom, that's identity theft." "Don't be so dramatic, Melissa. After everything I sacrificed for you and Tyler, do you know how many meals I skipped so you could eat? The second job I took to pay for your braces? Your fancy college applications?" The guilt trip was familiar territory, but this was different. This wasn't about borrowing $20 or asking for help with rent. This was a fraud. That doesn't give you the right to steal my identity and ruin my credit. I was shouting now, tears streaming down my face. I can't even rent an apartment with a credit score this low. It's just a temporary setback, a little reminder to be grateful for everything I've done for you. Her tone was dismissive, as if I was overreacting to a minor inconvenience rather than a life-altering betrayal. Grateful? You want me to be grateful that you committed fraud? I raised you better than this, Melissa. Family helps family. I hung up the phone and collapsed onto my kitchen floor, sobbing. This wasn't just about money. It was about trust, boundaries, and the realization that my mother viewed me as an extension of herself rather than an individual with my own life and future. The next few weeks were a blur of anxiety and paperwork. I contacted every creditor, explaining the situation. Most were sympathetic but firm. Without a police report indicating identity theft, they couldn't remove the accounts from my credit history. And filing a police report meant pressing charges against my own mother. My brother Tyler was no help. When I called him, his response was, "Just pay it off, Mel. You've always been the golden child with your fancy job in the city. The least you could do is help Mom out." I felt completely alone. My coworkers couldn't understand why I suddenly started bringing lunch from home instead of joining them at restaurants. They didn't know I was now sending half my paycheck to minimum payments on debts I never incurred, just to stop the bleeding on my credit score. My apartment lease was ending in 2 months, and with my destroyed credit, no landlord would approve me for a new place. I started selling furniture and clothing online, desperately trying to build a security fund while considering moving in with a coworker temporarily. One particularly low evening, I found myself scrolling through financial advice forums when I came across a post from someone in a similar situation. They had contacted a nonprofit credit counseling agency and a lawyer who specialized in identity theft. With renewed determination, I made an appointment with both for the following week. The credit counselor, James Rodriguez, was a kind man in his 50s who didn't judge when I broke down crying in his office. "Unfortunately, what you're describing is more common than you'd think," he said gently. "And it's particularly difficult when the perpetrator is family." "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "Part of me feels like I should just pay it all off to avoid family drama, but another part is furious that she did this to me." James leaned forward. "Melissa, I need you to understand something. This isn't a favor your mom asked for and you declined. This is fraud, and by taking on these debts without filing a police report, you're essentially telling creditors that these are legitimate debts you agreed to." "But she's my mother," I whispered. "And mothers are supposed to protect their children, not exploit them," he countered. "Would you do this to your child?" The question hit me hard. No, I would never saddle someone I loved with crushing debt and then call it a reminder to be grateful. The lawyer I met with, Sandra Martinez, was equally direct. "You have 3 options," she explained. 1, you pay off debts you never incurred, which could take decades and isn't fair to you. 2, you file for bankruptcy, which will further damage your credit for years. Or 3, you file a police report for identity theft, which would allow us to dispute these accounts with creditors and potentially have them removed from your credit history. "But my mom could go to jail," I protested. Sandra's expression softened slightly. "That's a possibility, yes. But consider this. She committed a crime that has real consequences for your life. Your ability to rent an apartment, buy a home, get certain jobs, or even obtain security clearances could be affected for years. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for people we love is to hold them accountable." I left her office with a folder of forms and a heavy heart. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the sacrifices my mother had made for us growing up. The double shifts during holidays, the time she pawned her wedding ring to buy my prom dress. But I also thought about her dismissive attitude when confronted. The way she weaponized my gratitude. The complete disregard for my future. The next morning, I called my mother again, hoping for a different conversation. "Mom, we need to talk about these accounts. I can't qualify for an apartment with this credit score. I need you to close these accounts and start making payments." "Honey, if I could afford the payments, I wouldn't have needed the money in the first place." Her voice took on the martyred tone I knew too well. "Besides, you make good money now. This is what family does. We help each other out." "This isn't helping, Mom. This is stealing. And it's illegal." "So what are you going to do? Call the police on your own mother?" she scoffed. "After everything I've done for you?" There it was again, the guilt trip, the emotional manipulation. I don't want to do that, I said honestly. But I will if I have to. This isn't fair, and you know it. Life isn't fair, Melissa. I thought I raised you to understand that. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for hours, staring at the police report forms. My hands trembled as I began filling them out, tears blurring my vision. Each section felt like another nail in the coffin of my relationship with my mother. But with each completed field, I also felt something unexpected. A sense of standing up for myself, perhaps for the first time in my life. The following day, I walked into the police station, report in hand. The officer who took my statement was professional and non-judgmental. He explained that they would investigate, and my mother would likely be contacted. There was a real possibility of charges being filed. "Are you sure you want to proceed?" he asked, giving me one last chance to back out. I thought about the apartment I wouldn't be able to rent, the car I couldn't finance, the years it would take to repair my credit. And I thought about my mother's words. A little reminder to be grateful. "Yes," I said firmly. "I'm sure." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. Leaving the police station, I felt both lighter and heavier. I had done what I needed to do to protect myself, but the weight of what might happen next was daunting. I had no idea what the coming months would bring, but for the first time since discovering the fraud, I felt like I was taking control of my life again. That evening, my phone exploded with texts and calls from family members. My brother called, me selfish and cruel. My aunt said I was breaking my mother's heart. My grandmother reminded me that family business stays in the family, but none of them had to live with a 480 credit score. None of them had their futures stolen. And none of them seemed to understand that what my mother did wasn't an act of desperation. It was a calculated betrayal that had taken place over months. 3 days after filing the police report, I received a call from Detective Walsh, who had been assigned to my case. "Ms. Wright, we've spoken with your mother," he said carefully. "She's admitted to opening the accounts but insists you gave her verbal permission." I gripped the phone tighter. "That's not true. I never would have agreed to this." "I believe you," he said simply. "The evidence supports your claim, particularly given that the addresses were deliberately set to her home to keep statements away from you. We'll be moving forward with charges, but the prosecutor may offer a plea deal given that it's a first offense and a family matter." It was really happening. My mother was facing criminal charges because of me. No, because of her own actions, I reminded myself. This was her choice, not mine. The credit card companies and lenders were cooperative once I had the police report. The process of disputing the fraudulent accounts began, though I was warned it would take time to see improvements in my credit score. My temporary housing situation became more permanent as I moved in with my coworker Rachel, who offered her spare room when she heard a simplified version of my story. "Family drama and credit issues," I'd explained, too embarrassed to share the full truth. A month later, I received notice that my mother had accepted a plea deal: probation, mandatory financial counseling, and restitution payments. No jail time, which was a relief I hadn't known I needed until I felt it wash over me. That same day, she called me for the first time since the investigation began. "Why couldn't you have just helped me?" were her first words. No apology. No acknowledgement of the damage she'd caused. "Mom, you didn't ask for help. You stole my identity. You always were too sensitive, too stuck on technicalities," she sighed. "I suppose you're happy now that I have a criminal record." The old Melissa would have apologized, would have tried to smooth things over. But I wasn't that person anymore. "I'm not happy about any of this," I said truthfully. "But I'm not going to apologize for protecting myself." "So this is how it's going to be?" You're choosing money over family? This isn't about money, Mom. It's about trust. It's about respect. And until you can see that, we don't have much to talk about. I hung up feeling both hollow and somehow more complete than I had in years. The road ahead would be long, rebuilding my credit, navigating a strained family relationship, learning to set and maintain boundaries. But for perhaps the first time, I was putting myself first without guilt. That night, as Rachel and I shared a simple dinner in her apartment, she asked me how I was doing. Honestly, I'm not sure, I admitted. Some moments I feel strong and certain, and others I wonder if I've made a terrible mistake. From what little you've told me, Rachel said, it sounds like someone took advantage of you in a major way. Standing up for yourself isn't wrong, even when it's hard. I nodded, thinking about all the times I'd been taught that self-sacrifice was the highest virtue, especially for women. How many times had I heard family comes first used as a weapon to demand compliance? As I helped clear the dishes, I realized something important. True gratitude couldn't be coerced or manipulated. It had to be freely given, just like forgiveness. And both would take time. Time that I now had the freedom to take. 6 months after. Filing the police report, my life had reached a fragile new normal. I was still living with Rachel. My credit score had inched up to the low 500s, and I'd received a small promotion at work that helped cover the minimum payments on the few remaining disputed accounts. The criminal case against my mother had concluded, with her serving no jail time, just as the detective had predicted. Instead, she was on probation for 3 years and required to attend financial counseling sessions. According to the terms of her plea deal, she was also supposed to be making monthly restitution payments I had yet to see. My brother Tyler still wasn't speaking to me. The last text I received from him read simply, "Hope the extra money in your bank account is worth destroying our family." I didn't bother explaining that there was no extra money, only the slow, painful process of rebuilding what had been taken from me. Rachel had become more than just a roommate. She was the support system I desperately needed. One evening, as we sat on her balcony sharing a bottle of wine, she asked the question most people were too uncomfortable to voice. "Do you think you'll ever forgive her?" I stared out at the Chicago skyline, considering. I don't know what forgiveness looks like in this situation, I admitted. Part of me understands she was desperate, but another part can't get past how easily she justified it, like my future was just an extension of hers to use as she pleased. Family stuff is complicated. Rachel nodded. My dad drank away our college funds and then had the nerve to ask why none of us went to university. Parents can be blind to their own damage. That night, I couldn't sleep. Rachel's question echoed in my mind. Would I ever forgive my mother? And what would that forgiveness mean? Reconciliation? Pretending it never happened? Or something else? Entirely? Around 3 a.m., I opened my laptop and typed out an email I'd been avoiding for months. Mom, it's been 6 months since everything happened. My credit score is slowly improving, though I'm still dealing with the consequences of the accounts opened in my name. According to the court, you should be making monthly restitution payments, but I haven't received anything yet. I'm not writing to pressure you about the money, though I do need it. I'm writing because despite everything, you're still my mother, and this silence between us feels wrong. I'm not ready to pretend everything is okay, it's not, and we both know that. But I am ready to start a conversation about how we move forward. From here, if you're willing to talk, really talk, not just defend or accuse, I'd like to meet in person next month when I have some time off work. Let me know. Melissa. I let my finger hover over the send button for several minutes before finally clicking it. Whatever came next, I had taken the first step. 3 days passed with no response. Then a week. I told myself I hadn't expected anything different, but the disappointment was still sharp. Then, 10 days after I sent the email, a reply appeared in my inbox. Melissa, I'm sorry about the restitution payments. Things have been tight since I lost my second job. The manager found out about what happened and let me go. I've been picking up shifts at the diner when I can, but it's barely covering the bills. I don't know what you want me to say. What I did was wrong. I know that. The counselor they make me see keeps talking about boundaries and financial abuse, like I'm some kind of monster. But you've never been in my shoes, raising 2 kids alone, working until your feet bleed, watching bill collectors circle like vultures. If you want to meet, I'll be here. Same house you grew up in, the one I've managed to keep despite everything. Mom, it wasn't the response I'd hoped for, but it was something. No explicit apology, but at least an acknowledgement that what she'd done was wrong. And beneath the defensiveness, I could sense a vulnerability that had never been there before. The next few weeks flew by as I prepared for the trip back to Indiana. Rachel helped me process my jumbled emotions, while James from the credit counseling agency provided practical advice for the conversation. Set clear expectations, he advised. Discuss repayment plans, but also the emotional boundaries you need, going forward. And remember, you can forgive without forgetting. Rebuilding trust will require consistent actions from her, not just words. The day of my trip arrived with a mixture of dread and hope churning in my stomach. I rented a car for the 3-hour drive, unwilling to be dependent on anyone for transportation if things went south. My childhood home looked smaller than I remembered. The blue paint had faded to a dull gray, and the flower beds my mother once meticulously maintained were overrun with weeds. A pang of sadness hit me, this physical deterioration mirroring the decay in our relationship. Mom answered the door before I could knock, as if she'd been watching for me. She looked older, the lines around her eyes deeper, her hair showing more gray than I recalled. We stood awkwardly for a moment before she stepped back to let me in. "You look good," she said quietly. "The city agrees with you." "Thanks." I glanced around the living room, noting the same faded furniture from my childhood. "How have you been?" "Managing." She gestured toward the kitchen. "I made your favorite, chicken, and dumplings, if you're hungry." The familiar aroma brought a wave of nostalgia so powerful it almost knocked me off balance. This was her peace offering, I realized. Food had always been her language of love when words failed her. We ate in uncomfortable silence for several minutes before I finally gathered the courage to address why I'd come. "Mom, we need to talk about what happened." She set down her fork with a sigh. "What's there to say? I messed up. I'm paying for it. We both are." "Why did you do it?" I asked the question that had haunted me for months. "Why not just ask me for help? Would you have given me $70,000? She raised an eyebrow. "Of course not. I don't have that kind of money." "Exactly, and I needed it." She pushed her plate away, suddenly agitated. "Tyler needed braces. The roof was leaking. The car broke down. And then there were the hospital bills after my gallbladder surgery. It just spiraled." "But why my identity? Why not bankruptcy or negotiating with creditors?" "Pride," she admitted after a long pause. "I've spent my whole life taking care of everything myself. Asking for help felt like failure. And then one day, I got a credit card offer in your name. I told myself I'd just use it for the emergency and pay it off before you ever knew. But then there was another emergency, and another. It wasn't a justification, but it was more insight than I'd had before. I could almost see how, in her desperate mind, it had made a twisted kind of sense. "That little reminder to be grateful comment," I said, the words still stinging months later. "Did you really mean that?" Her eyes dropped to the table. I was defensive, ashamed, lashing out. She looked, meeting my gaze directly. "But no, I don't really believe that. You've always been grateful, Melissa. Even as a little girl, you never took anything for granted." Something loosened in my chest at her words. Not forgiveness, Not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. Need to know this won't happen again, I said firmly. With me or with Tyler. I need to know you understand the damage this has caused. The counselor is helping, she admitted reluctantly, making me see things differently. I never thought about how this would affect your future. I was just focused on surviving the present. We talked for hours, painful, honest conversation that we'd never had before. I learned about debts I'd never known existed, the extent of her financial struggles, and the shame that had prevented her from seeking legitimate help. She learned about my anxiety attacks when checking the mail, the apartment opportunities I'd lost, and the humiliation of explaining my housing situation to coworkers. By evening, we had reached an understanding of sorts. She agreed to a modest, monthly repayment plan once she secured steadier employment. I agreed to help her organize her finances and explore legitimate assistance programs. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. As I prepared to leave, she pressed something into my hand, a small wooden box I recognized from my childhood. "What's this?" I asked, opening it to find a delicate silver locket. "It was your grandmother's. I was saving it for your 30th birthday, but I think you should have it now." Her voice wavered. "It's not much toward what I owe you, but it's a promise that I'm trying." I fastened the locket around my neck, feeling the weight of it, not just the physical pendant, but what it represented. "Thank you." The drive back to Chicago gave me time to process. We hadn't solved everything in one day, nor had I expected to. Trust, once broken, didn't mend overnight, but we had laid a foundation for whatever would come next. Back in Chicago, life continued its forward motion. 2 weeks after my visit, the first restitution payment arrived, small but symbolic. My credit disputes were progressing, with 3 of the fraudulent accounts now removed from my report, and I'd started saving for a security deposit, determined to have my own place again by the end of the year. Rachel noticed the change in me almost immediately. "You seem lighter," she observed one morning as we prepared for work. "Like you set something down." "Not completely," I clarified. "But I'm learning I don't have to carry all of it forever." The most surprising development came a month later when Tyler called out of the blue. "Mom told me what really happened," he said, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "About the debts and stuff. I didn't know it was that bad." "It's okay," I said, though part of me wanted to point out he could have asked before assuming the worst of me. "No, it's not. I said some pretty harsh things." He cleared his throat. "Anyway, I'm sorry. And I want to help with the payments. I can't do much, but I got a better job at the auto shop and—" "Tyler, stop," I interrupted gently. "This isn't your debt to pay." "You're not the only one who can be responsible, you know," he replied with a hint of his old spirit. "Let me do this, for both of you." That evening, I updated my budget spreadsheet, adding Tyler's contribution to my mother's payments. At the current rate, it would take nearly 7 years to clear the remaining debt. 7 years of financial rebuilding, of carefully reconstructed trust, of redefining what family meant to all of us. But for the first time since discovering those fraudulent accounts, 7 years felt manageable. It was no longer an indefinite sentence, but a defined path forward. 3 months after my visit home, I was approved for a small apartment. The rent was higher than it should have been given my still recovering credit score, and the security deposit was painful, but it was mine. Rachel helped me move in, christening the space with a bottle of champagne and take-out Chinese food on the bare floor. "To new beginnings," she toasted, raising her plastic cup. "And painful lessons," I added, clinking my cup against hers. That night, alone in my new place, I unpacked the silver locket my mother had given me. Inside was a tiny photo I hadn't noticed before. My mother holding me as an infant, both of us smiling into the camera. Before complications, before betrayals, before the weight of adulthood pressed down on either of us. I placed it on my nightstand, not quite ready to wear it regularly, but no longer wanting to hide it away. Like my relationship with my mother, it existed in an in-between space, not fully embraced, not fully rejected, but acknowledged as part of my story. 6 months later, I received a letter from my mother. Inside was a certificate of completion from her financial counseling program, and a check, larger than her usual payment, got a better job at the hospital cafeteria. Benefits start next month. I know this doesn't fix everything, but I'm trying. I traced my fingers over her handwriting, noting how much steadier it looked than in previous notes. Progress was happening on both sides of this fractured relationship. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I called my mother just to talk. Not about debts or court dates or repayment plans, but about ordinary things. Her garden, my job, the book we were both coincidentally reading. Our conversation wasn't without awkward pauses and careful navigation around sensitive topics, but it was a conversation nonetheless, one that ended with tentative plans for her to visit Chicago in the spring. "I'd like to see your new place," she said, caution in her voice as if expecting rejection. "I'd like that," I replied, surprising myself with how much I meant it. As I hung up, I realized that forgiveness wasn't a single moment of absolution, but a series of small choices made day after day. It was setting boundaries while leaving the door open. It was protecting myself while allowing for the possibility of change. My mother had taken a $70,000 loan in my name and called it a little reminder to be grateful. The irony wasn't lost on me that through this painful experience, I had indeed found new gratitude, not for her sacrifice or even her current efforts at redemption, but for my own resilience, for the strength I hadn't known I possessed until it was tested, for the ability to stand firm in my worth while still leaving room for grace. The journey ahead would have its challenges. Financial recovery would take years. Trust would be rebuilt slowly, if at all. But I was no longer defined by what had been done to me. I was defined by how I had chosen to respond, by the boundaries I had set, and by the future I was determined to reclaim, one payment at a time. Spring arrived in Chicago with a burst of color and warmth that seemed to mirror the cautious renewal happening in my life. My credit score had climbed to 620, still not ideal, but enough to qualify for reasonable interest rates on necessary purchases. The fraudulent car loan had finally been removed from my record after months of back and forth with the lender. And most significantly, my mother was coming to visit. I spent the week before her arrival in a cleaning frenzy, as if scrubbing my baseboards could somehow make our reunion less complicated. Rachel, who had moved in with her boyfriend but remained my closest confidant, stopped by to help. "You know she's not coming to inspect your housekeeping, right?" she asked, watching me reorganize my pantry for the third time. "I know, it's just—" I struggled to articulate the tangled emotions. "I want to show her I'm okay, that what she did didn't destroy me." Rachel nodded, understanding what I couldn't fully express. "You want her to see your strength, not just your wounds." The day Mom arrived, I paced my apartment, checking the window every few minutes. When her taxi finally pulled up, I took a deep breath and reminded myself of the boundaries I'd worked so hard to establish. This visit was about moving forward, not rehashing the past, but also not pretending the harm hadn't occurred. She looked better than when I'd last seen her. Less drawn, her hair freshly cut, wearing a new blouse I didn't recognize. We hugged awkwardly at the door, the familiar scent of her perfume bringing a rush of conflicting emotions. "Your place is lovely," she said, glancing around with genuine appreciation. "It suits you." "Thanks. It's small, but it's all I need right now." I took her suitcase, showing her to the guest room that doubled as my home office. "I thought we could walk to dinner. There's an Italian place around the corner that makes great lasagna." "That sounds perfect." She set her purse down, then hesitated before pulling out an envelope. "Before we go, I wanted to give you this." Inside was a check for $5,000, far more than our agreed monthly payments. "Mom, this is... How did you—" "I sold the Toyota," she explained, a hint of irony in her voice considering it was the car she'd fraudulently purchased in my name. "Tyler helped me find a reliable used car instead. The difference paid off the last of that loan and left this. For you." She met my eyes steadily. "It's not everything, but it's a start." I stared at the check, emotions warring within me. Part of me wanted to refuse it, to tell her that money couldn't fix what had happened between us. But another part recognized what this represented: a concrete acknowledgement of the harm done and a genuine effort toward making amends. "Thank you," I said finally, slipping the check into my desk drawer. "This will help a lot." Dinner was surprisingly pleasant, filled with stories of Tyler's new promotion and Mom's work at the hospital. We navigated around the difficult topics with the caution of people walking through a minefield, focusing instead on neutral territory. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than I'd dared to hope. The real breakthrough came the following morning. We were sitting on my tiny balcony with coffee when Mom suddenly set down her cup with unusual decisiveness. "I've been seeing a therapist," she announced, as if confessing to something scandalous. Not just the court-mandated financial counselor, a real therapist. I blinked in surprise. My mother had always dismissed therapy as paying strangers to listen to your problems when we were growing up. "That's great, Mom. What made you decide to go?" "Tyler, actually." She smiled faintly. "After everything happened with you, he started asking questions about your father, about why I never pursued child support. Why did I work myself to illness instead of asking for help?" She twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit I'd forgotten about. I didn't have good answers. Or rather, I had answers I wasn't proud of. I waited, giving her space to continue. "Dr. Winters, my therapist. She says I have something called financial trauma. That watching my own parents lose everything in the bank collapse of the 80s affected how I view money. Made me see it as something that can disappear in an instant." She glanced at me. "She says I've been operating from a place of scarcity my whole adult life." "That makes sense, given everything you went through," I acknowledged, seeing my mother through new eyes. Not just as the person who had betrayed me, but as someone shaped by her own painful experiences. "It explains things, but it doesn't excuse them," she said firmly, surprising me with her clarity. "What I did to you was wrong. Period. No amount of understanding why changes that." Something shifted between us in that moment, a recognition that healing didn't require minimizing the harm that had been done. "Dr. Winters suggested something," she continued cautiously. "Family therapy, for all three of us, you, me, and Tyler, to address the patterns we've created together." She hurried to add, "Only if you're comfortable, of course, and it could be with someone here in Chicago." My immediate instinct was to refuse. I'd made progress on my own terms, established boundaries that were working. But I also recognized the potential value in addressing our family dynamics with professional guidance. "Let me think about it," I said honestly. "It's a big step." She nodded, accepting my response without pushing. Another small indication of change. Later that day, as we walked along the lakefront, Mom asked about my job. I told her about my recent promotion and the new marketing campaign I was heading. "You always were the creative one," she said, pride evident in her voice. "Remember those elaborate stories you used to write? I still have some of them in a box somewhere." I'd forgotten about those, I admitted, smiling at the memory of my fantasy epics featuring unicorns with improbable names. "You stopped writing after your father left," she observed quietly. "I always wondered if those two things were connected." I considered this, realizing she was right. I think I stopped believing in happy endings. We walked in silence for a moment before she spoke. Again. I robbed you of more than money, didn't I? With what I did. The question caught me off guard with its perception. What do you mean? Your sense of security, your ability to trust. She kept her eyes on the horizon. The belief that you were protected by the people who should protect you. Her articulation of the deeper damage was so unexpected and accurate that tears sprang to my eyes. Yes, I whispered. That's exactly it. I can't give those things back, she said, her voice thick with regret. No repayment plan covers that kind of debt. No, I agreed, but recognizing it matters. We continued our walk, the acknowledgement hanging between us. Not solving everything, but creating space for something new to potentially grow. The weekend passed quickly, and soon I was driving Mom to the airport. As we pulled up to the departures area, she turned to me with unusual solemnity. I've been thinking about what you said, about rebuilding trust. I want to show you something. She pulled out her phone and opened her banking app, then handed it to me. I've set up an automatic transfer to your account, $200 every week. It's not much, but it's consistent. And it's the most I can manage right now. I scrolled through the scheduled transactions, noting they extended indefinitely into the future. It wasn't just the money that mattered. It was the commitment to consistent, transparent action without requiring oversight or reminders. And I want you to have this, she continued, passing me a sealed envelope. Don't open it now. Wait until you get home. We hugged goodbye with less awkwardness than before, and I watched her disappear into the terminal before heading back to my apartment. Once home, I opened the envelope to find a letter and a small key. Melissa, this key opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank in Indianapolis. Inside you'll find the deed to the house, which I've transferred into your name. Before you protest, this isn't about guilt or obligation. It's about making things right in the only way I know how. The house isn't worth much financially, but it's the only real asset I have. More importantly, it's now legally yours, which means I can never borrow against it or use it as collateral without your knowledge and consent. I've removed that temptation entirely. I know this doesn't erase what happened. Nothing can. But I want you to know that I'm committed to the long, difficult work of earning back your trust, even knowing I might never fully succeed. With love and genuine remorse, Mom, I sat on my couch, the key heavy in my palm, unsure how to feel about this grand gesture. On one hand, it represented a significant sacrifice and a concrete step toward making amends. On the other, it created a new financial entanglement when I'd worked so hard to establish independence. After consideration, I called my lawyer, Sandra Martinez, who had helped me through the initial identity theft case. She agreed to review the deed transfer and advise me on next steps. You don't have to decide right away, she assured me. We can hold the property in a trust if you're uncomfortable, with direct ownership. The important thing is that you have options. Options. Such a simple word for something I'd felt deprived of for so long. That evening I called Tyler to discuss the house situation, expecting resistance. Instead, he surprised me. I think it's right, he said simply. You're the one who got hurt. You should have security. But it's your inheritance too, I protested. Mel, after what happened, I had to take a hard look at how I've been coasting through life expecting Mom, and sometimes you, to bail me out. His voice had a new maturity I hadn't heard before. I'm okay with starting from scratch, building something that's actually mine. We talked for nearly 2 hours, longer than we had in years, about our childhood, our mother's struggles, the ways we'd each adapted, me by becoming hyper-responsible, him by avoiding responsibility altogether. For the first time, I felt like we were relating as adults rather than falling into our childhood roles. By the time we hung up, we'd agreed to try the family therapy Mom had suggested. Not with any expectation of a perfect reconciliation, but with the hope of understanding the patterns that had led us here and creating healthier ones moving forward. The following week brought another surprise, an email from James Rodriguez, the credit counselor who had guided me through the initial crisis. Melissa, I hope this email finds you well. I'm reaching out because we're starting a support group for victims of familial financial abuse, and I immediately thought of you. Your journey and resilience could provide invaluable perspective to others just beginning this process. Of course, I understand if you're not comfortable sharing your experience. Recovery is deeply personal, and there's no obligation to make your story public. But if you're interested, our first meeting is next Thursday evening. Regardless of your decision, I want you to know that your case has stayed with me. You faced an impossible situation with remarkable courage, and I believe that deserves recognition. Warmly, James Rodriguez. I read the email several times, considering the invitation. My instinct was to decline, to keep my experience private rather than revisiting it for an audience of strangers. But something James had said resonated with me. Your journey and resilience could provide invaluable perspective to others. Perhaps there was purpose in what I'd endured. Not a justification for the harm done, but a meaning I could create from it. After careful consideration, I responded that I would attend, not committing to speaking but willing to listen and evaluate whether sharing my story might benefit others, facing similar betrayals. The night of the meeting, I sat in my car outside the community center for nearly 15 minutes, debating whether to go in. What finally propelled me forward was remembering how alone I'd felt in those early days. How convinced I was that no one could possibly understand the unique pain of being betrayed by the person who was supposed to protect me. Inside, I found a circle of chairs and a diverse group of people who, on the surface, had little in common. Young college students, middle-aged professionals, elderly retirees. But as they began to share their stories, the common threads emerged: the shock of discovery, the crushing guilt, the painful decisions, the slow rebuilding of lives and sometimes relationships. When my turn came, I surprised myself by speaking. Haltingly at first, then with increasing clarity, I shared my journey from that moment at the bank when my credit card application was denied through the police report, the gradual financial recovery, and the tentative steps toward reconciliation with my mother. The hardest part wasn't the financial damage, I concluded. It was recognizing that someone who loved me was capable of hurting me so fundamentally. That love and harm could coexist in the same relationship. Heads nodded around the circle. No one offered platitudes or easy solutions, just quiet understanding that meant more than words could express. After the meeting, a young woman approached me, her eyes red from crying during her own share. "My dad took out loans in my name for his business," she said quietly. "Everyone tells me to just cut him off, but it's not that simple." "No," I agreed. "It's never that simple." "How did you know what to do? How to balance accountability with everything else?" I considered her question carefully. I didn't at first. I just knew I couldn't keep pretending it hadn't happened. The rest, the boundaries, the rebuilding, the decision about what kind of relationship was possible, that evolved over time. And now? Are you okay? I thought about my rising credit score, the apartment I could afford on my own, the professional success I'd achieved despite the setbacks, the difficult but honest conversations with my mother, the key to a house I wasn't sure I wanted but appreciated having the option to claim. "I'm getting there," I said truthfully. "Some days are harder than others, but I'm building something new, a life that acknowledges what happened without being defined by it." As I drove home that night, I reflected on how far I'd come from that devastating moment of discovery. The journey hadn't been linear or neat. There had been setbacks and difficult decisions, moments of anger and grief alongside glimpses of healing and hope. My mother had taken a $70,000 loan in my name and called it a little reminder to be grateful. The irony was that through this painful journey, I had indeed found a different kind of gratitude. Not for her actions, but for my own capacity to face betrayal without becoming bitter, to set boundaries without closing my heart entirely, to rebuild not just my credit, but my sense of self. The road ahead would still have its challenges. The full financial recovery would take years. Trust would continue to be a work in progress. But I was no longer defined by what had been done to me. I was defined by how I had chosen to respond, by the boundaries I had set, and by the future I was reclaiming one day at a time. 1 year had passed since I discovered the fraudulent accounts. My credit score now hovered at 680, still below where it had been, but solidly in the good range. The regular payments from my mother continued without fail, slowly chipping away at the remaining debt. The support group James had invited me to had become an unexpected anchor in my life, a place where I could speak freely about the complex emotions that those who hadn't experienced similar betrayals struggled to understand. Most significantly, I'd begun the process of establishing a trust to manage the house my mother had signed over to me. After consulting with Sandra, we'd decided on an arrangement that protected my interests while acknowledging my mother's need for stability. She could continue living there while paying a modest rent that went directly toward the remaining debt, essentially paying herself back through an arrangement that provided accountability. My professional life was flourishing as well. The marketing campaign I'd spearheaded had garnered industry recognition, leading to a substantial promotion. I now managed a small team and had an office with a door, small victories that represented the rebuilding of my career momentum after months of distraction and stress. It was during this period of relative calm that I received an unexpected email from Sandra Martinez. "Melissa, I hope this finds you well. I'm reaching out regarding a case that has crossed my desk. A young man named Marcus Ellis is dealing with a situation remarkably similar to yours. His father opened multiple credit accounts in his name, resulting in approximately $45,000 of ours fraudulent debt. Marcus is struggling with the same questions you faced: whether to file a police report, how to approach family members, what recovery looks like. I've spoken with James Rodriguez, and we both thought you might be willing to meet with Marcus, not as a legal advisor, but as someone who has navigated this difficult terrain. Of course, there's no obligation. I understand if you'd prefer to leave this chapter behind you. Best regards, Sandra Martinez." I stared at the screen, conflicted. Part of me wanted to politely decline, to focus on my own ongoing recovery rather than revisiting the raw emotions of those early days. But another part recognized that when I was at my lowest, having someone who truly understood would have been invaluable. After careful consideration, I agreed to meet Marcus for coffee. He arrived at the cafe looking exactly how I'd felt a year earlier, exhausted, shell-shocked, and deeply ashamed despite being the victim. He was younger than me, barely out of college, with the kind of earnest face that made his father's betrayal seem even more cruel. "Thank you for meeting me," he said after awkward introductions. "Sandra says you've been through something similar." "My mother," I confirmed. $70,000 across multiple accounts. His eyes widened slightly. "How did you handle it?" "Not perfectly," I admitted. "There's no playbook for this kind of betrayal." Over the next hour, I shared my experience, the difficult decisions, the painful conversations, the slow process of financial recovery. I was careful not to present my choices as the only correct path, emphasizing instead the importance of making decisions aligned with his own values and circumstances. "The hardest part was filing the police report," I told him. "But for me, it was necessary, both practically for disputing the accounts and emotionally for establishing that what happened wasn't okay." Marcus stared into his coffee. "My dad keeps saying he did it for me, that he needed the money to pay for my sister's medical treatments, and he'll pay it all back as soon as he gets back on his feet. But he's been saying that for months while my credit gets worse." The justification sounded painfully familiar. Did he ask you first? Give you the chance to decide if you want to take on that financial burden? No, he said softly. And when I confronted him, he said I was being selfish. That family takes care of the family. That phrase was used on me too, I acknowledged. But there's a difference between willingly helping a family and having your autonomy stripped away, between being asked and being taken from. As our conversation continued, I saw Marcus straighten slightly, the weight of undeserved guilt beginning to lift. I recognized the shift, the realization that setting boundaries wasn't an act of betrayal but of self-preservation. Before we parted, I gave him my contact information. Whatever you decide, you're not alone in this. The path forward isn't easy, but it is possible. His gratitude was palpable. It helps just knowing someone else has been through it, that you came out the other side. Driving home, I reflected on how much had changed. A year ago, I could barely speak about what had happened without tears. Now I was helping someone else navigate their own journey. The experience hadn't just been something to survive. It had given me a perspective and empathy I could use to support others. That evening, I received a text from my mother. Tyler told me about your promotion. So proud of you. I was thinking about visiting for your birthday next month, if that's okay. Our relationship had settled into a new rhythm. Not the unquestioning closeness of before, but not complete estrangement either. Regular phone calls, occasional visits, the careful navigation of boundaries. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest in a way our previous relationship hadn't been. That would be nice, I replied. Let me know your travel dates. A few days later, I met with the family therapist we'd been seeing quarterly. Dr. Patterson had helped us identify the unhealthy dynamics that had contributed to our situation. My mother's financial trauma and pride, my overfunctioning, Tyler's avoidance, all of us struggling to communicate directly about money and boundaries. How are things with your mother? She asked as we settled into our session. Better, I said truthfully. There's still tension sometimes, but we're talking more openly. She hasn't missed a payment, and she's continued her individual therapy. And how about you? How are you feeling about where things stand? I considered the question carefully. I'm not angry anymore, at least not most days, but I don't think I'll ever trust her completely with financial matters again. Is that a failure? Dr. Patterson shook her head. Trust isn't all or nothing. You can trust your mother in some contexts while maintaining appropriate boundaries in others. That's not failure, it's wisdom. Her words resonated deeply. I'd been measuring recovery against an impossible standard, the complete restoration of blind trust. But perhaps true healing wasn't about returning to what was, but about building something new with clear-eyed awareness of both possibilities and limitations. The following weekend, Rachel invited me to brunch to celebrate her engagement. As we toasted her happiness, she asked an unexpected question. Would you ever take out a loan for someone else, after everything that happened? The question gave me pause. My initial reaction was an emphatic no, the mere idea of entangling my finances with another person seemed dangerous after my experience, but as I considered it more deeply, I realized it wasn't that simple. It would depend, I said finally. I might, but only under certain conditions. Complete transparency, clear terms, a formal agreement, and most importantly, it would have to be a conscious choice on my part, not something taken without my knowledge or consent. Rachel nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. It's not about never helping family. It's about how the help happens. Exactly. The violation wasn't that my mother needed financial help. It was that she took away my agency, my right to choose whether or not to take on that burden. Later that night, I found myself thinking about Marcus, wondering if he'd decided to file a police report or pursue another path. I recalled something Dr. Patterson had said in an early session. There's no single right way to respond to betrayal. The only universal wrong is denying yourself the right to acknowledge the harm and set appropriate boundaries. Those words had guided me through many difficult decisions, reminding me that recovery wasn't about following a predetermined script, but about honoring my own needs and values. The next morning, I received an unexpected call from Tyler. "Hey, Mel," he began without a preamble. "I've been thinking about something. You know how Mom's been making those payments to you? Well, I want to contribute too." I was surprised by his offer. "Ty, you don't have to do that. This isn't your debt." "To pay? I know, but—" He hesitated. "I wasn't great when everything first happened. I said things, accused you of things, that weren't fair. This feels like a way to make that right." His acknowledgement touched me deeply. "Thank you for saying that, but honestly, your support means more to me than money. The way you've been there for Mom's therapy, helping her with the house, that matters more than any payment." "Are you sure? Because I could spare a couple $100 a month now with the new job." "I'm sure. Save it for your future. The debt is being handled." I paused, then added, "But I appreciate the offer more than you know." Our conversation shifted to lighter topics. His new girlfriend, my upcoming vacation plans, but the significance of his gesture lingered. It represented a profound shift in our family dynamics, an acknowledgement of harm, and a commitment to healing that went beyond financial restitution. That evening, I decided to do something I'd been contemplating for months. I opened my laptop and began to write. Not the fantasy stories of my childhood, but an honest account of my experience with identity theft at the hands of someone I loved. Not for publication or attention, but as a way to process what I'd been through and potentially help others facing similar situations. Words flowed more easily than I expected, the narrative taking shape as I chronicled the discovery, the decisions, the slow rebuilding of my life and relationships. It wasn't a story with a neat conclusion. The impacts of what had happened would echo through my life for years to come, but it was a story of resilience, of finding strength I hadn't known I possessed. When I finally stopped writing, I realized 4 hours had passed. My back ached from hunching over the keyboard, but my mind felt clearer than it had in months. There was power in shaping my own narrative, in claiming this experience as part of my story without allowing it to define me entirely. The following week, my mother arrived for her visit. As we sat on my balcony sharing coffee, a tradition that had emerged from her previous stay, she mentioned seeing my name on a billing statement from Dr. Patterson. "I realized I've never offered to cover the therapy costs," she said, clearly uncomfortable. "Given that the whole situation was my fault." "It's an investment in my well-being," I replied, "and in our relationship. I don't mind covering it." She nodded, accepting my decision without pushing. Another small indication of growth. "I've been thinking about something Dr. Patterson said," she ventured after a moment, "about how part of healing is creating new patterns instead of just trying to fix the old ones." "That resonates with me," I agreed. "Sometimes damage can't be undone. It can only be integrated into a new foundation." "Is that what we're doing? Building a new foundation?" I considered her question, looking out at the Chicago skyline. "I think so. It's not what either of us would have chosen, but maybe it can be stronger in some ways. More honest, at least." She reached across the small table to squeeze my hand briefly. "I hope so." The remainder of her visit passed pleasantly, filled with small excursions around the city and conversations that carefully balanced honesty with kindness. On her final night, we ordered takeout and watched a movie, the domesticity of the evening, both comforting and surreal given our history. As the credits rolled, she turned to me with unusual solemnity. "I've been saving for something. I wanted to show you." She pulled out her phone and opened her banking app to reveal a savings account labeled Melissa's Debt, with a balance of nearly $20,000. "I've been putting aside extra whenever possible," she explained. Tips from the hospital cafeteria, tax refund, overtime shifts. I'm hoping to make a large payment by Christmas. The amount represented a significant sacrifice on her limited income. More importantly, it represented a sustained commitment to making amends, not just in words, but in consistent action over time. Thank you, I said simply. That means a lot. After she left the following day, I found myself at loose ends, the apartment too quiet after days of companionship. On impulse, I texted Marcus, checking in on how he was doing. His response came quickly. Filed the police report yesterday. Hardest thing I've ever done, but I feel like I can breathe for the first time in months. Thank you for helping me find the courage. A wave of emotion washed over me, pride in his bravery, compassion for his pain, and a profound sense that perhaps the purpose of my own ordeal had been revealed. Not to make me more cautious or cynical, but to equip me to stand with others facing similar betrayals, offering not just sympathy, but genuine understanding. 2 years after discovering those fraudulent accounts, my life looked markedly different than I had imagined. My credit score had finally returned to its previous excellent range. The remaining debt had been reduced to a manageable amount that would be cleared within 18 months at the current payment rate. My relationship with my mother continued to evolve, not restored to blind trust, but rebuilt on a foundation of accountability, transparency, and mutual respect. Most significantly, I had found unexpected meaning in an experience I'd once viewed only as trauma. Through the support group, through mentoring individuals like Marcus, through the memoir I continued to develop in private moments, I was transforming a painful chapter into a source of connection and healing, not just for myself, but for others, navigating the complicated terrain of familial financial abuse. My mother had taken a $70,000 loan in my name and called it a little reminder to be grateful. The phrase still stung when I recalled it, but I could now recognize the profound irony, with clarity rather than bitterness. Through this unwanted journey, I had indeed discovered a deeper gratitude, not for what was taken from me, but for what I had found within myself. Resilience, boundaries, wisdom, compassion. These were the true gifts, earned rather than given, that would guide me forward into whatever challenges lay ahead, not as a victim defined by betrayal, but as a whole person who had integrated both pain and healing into a life of meaning and purpose. 3 years after discovering the fraudulent accounts, I stood outside a community college classroom, taking deep breaths to calm my nerves. The sign on the door read, Financial Literacy Workshop, Protecting Your Identity. Inside, 20 people waited to hear me speak about my experience with familial identity theft. James Rodriguez had convinced me to share my story as part of a public education initiative. Your perspective is valuable, he'd insisted. Not just the financial aspects, but the emotional journey. How to navigate betrayal by someone you love while still protecting yourself. When I finally entered the room, I was surprised by the diversity of the audience. College students, middle-aged, professionals, elderly retirees. The commonality wasn't age or background, but vulnerability. Everyone had either experienced financial exploitation or feared they might. My name is Melissa Wright, I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. 3 years ago, I discovered that my mother had opened multiple credit accounts in my name, accumulating $70,000 in debt without my knowledge or consent. For the next hour, I shared my journey. Not just the practical steps of filing a police report and disputing fraudulent accounts, but the emotional complexity of holding a loved one accountable while still leaving room for redemption. I spoke about boundaries, about the difference between forgiveness and trust, about rebuilding a life and relationships in the aftermath of betrayal. During the Q&A session, a woman in her 60s raised her hand. How did you find the courage to file the police report? I'm facing a similar situation with my son, and I can't bear the thought of him having a criminal record. The question struck a chord. It wasn't courage so much as desperation, I admitted. I realized that by not holding my mother accountable, I was enabling behavior that would ultimately destroy us both. Sometimes love means creating consequences, not removing them. After the workshop, several attendees lingered to speak with me privately, sharing snippets of their own stories or asking for resources. James watched from the doorway, a satisfied smile on his face. "I told you people needed to hear this," said as we walked to the parking lot. "You have a gift for making a complicated situation understandable without oversimplifying it." "It helps that I've had time to process everything," I replied. "I couldn't have done this 3 years ago." Which is exactly why your perspective is so valuable. You've moved through all the stages: shock, anger, bargaining, grief, acceptance. You've found meaning in something that could have left you bitter. His words stayed with me on the drive home, prompting reflection on how far I'd come. The practical aspects of recovery were nearly complete. My credit score had returned to excellent status. The debt was fully paid as of 3 months ago, and I'd recently purchased my first condo with a favorable interest rate that would have been impossible in the aftermath of the identity theft. But the emotional and relational recovery had been more nuanced. My relationship with my mother had settled into a new normal: regular phone calls, occasional visits, a careful honesty about both painful history and present hopes. The borrowed money had been repaid in full through consistent monthly payments, and occasional larger contributions from her savings fund. More surprising was the transformation in my broader life purpose. What began as private journaling had evolved into a memoir manuscript currently being reviewed by literary agents. The support group I'd joined had asked me to become a co-facilitator, and most recently, I'd been approached about creating an online resource for victims of familial financial abuse, combining practical guidance with emotional support. My phone buzzed with a text message from Tyler. "Mom told me about your presentation. Proud of you, sis. Turning something awful into something helpful. That's you all over." The message warmed me. My brother had matured significantly over the past 3 years, taking responsibility for his own finances and becoming an unexpected ally in maintaining healthy family dynamics. He'd even attended several family therapy sessions voluntarily, working through his own issues with financial dependence and avoidance. That evening, I received an email from Marcus, the young man I'd mentored through his own identity theft ordeal 2 years earlier. We'd stayed in irregular contact, checking in during major milestones of his recovery process. "Melissa, just wanted to let you know that my credit score finally hit 700 this month. It's been a long road, but I'm finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. The last fraudulent account was removed from my report last week, and I'm pre-approved for a car loan at a decent rate. Things with my dad are still complicated. He completed his community service last year, and we've had some careful conversations. Not sure we'll ever be close again, but at least we're talking. I've started volunteering with a financial literacy program at my old high school. It feels good to channel this experience into something useful instead of just being angry about it. Thank you again for everything. I'm not sure I would have had the courage to file that police report without knowing someone else had walked that road and survived." His email exemplified what I'd come to believe about traumatic experiences. They could destroy you, or they could transform you, depending largely on how you metabolized them. Marcus had taken a devastating betrayal and used it as fuel for growth and service to others. I felt a surge of pride in his resilience. The following weekend, my mother came to visit my new condo for the first time. She'd been hesitant to come, aware that my ability to purchase a home represented both my recovery from the financial damage she'd caused and my definitive independence from her influence. "It's beautiful," she said, running her hand along the granite countertop in the kitchen. "You've done so well for yourself, Melissa." "Thank you." I watched her take in the space, my space, with a complex mixture of emotions. It feels good to have something that's entirely mine, She nodded, understanding the layers beneath my words. As it should be. Later, as we sat on the small balcony overlooking the neighborhood park, she broached a subject we'd carefully avoided during her previous visits. "I've been thinking about what happens after probation ends next month," she said, fidgeting with her coffee cup. "The restrictions will be lifted and technically I could apply for credit again." I tensed involuntarily, old fears surfacing despite the progress we'd made. "I don't plan to," she continued quickly, noting my reaction. "In fact, I've been working with my financial counselor on a plan to stay cash only for at least another year. She hesitated. "I wanted you to know that I understand why that might worry you, and I'm taking steps to make sure nothing like this ever happens again." Her voluntary transparency touched me deeply. It represented an awareness of the trauma she'd caused and a genuine commitment to not repeating harmful patterns. "I appreciate you telling me," I said sincerely. "And I'm proud of the work you've done with your counselor." "It's not easy," she admitted. "Changing financial habits ingrained over decades. But it's necessary." She looked at me directly. "Not just for any potential reconciliation between us, but for my own well-being. I don't want to live in fear of the next financial emergency anymore." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over the city. The conversation wasn't dramatic or emotionally charged, just honest adults acknowledging reality and making conscious choices about moving forward. The next morning, I received a call from Sandra Martinez, the lawyer who had helped me through the initial legal process. "Melissa, I hope I'm not interrupting your weekend," she began. "I'm calling because I've been approached about developing a training program for financial institutions, specifically focused on identifying and responding to familial financial abuse. They're looking for a consultant who understands both the legal and emotional dimensions. I immediately thought of you. The opportunity aligned perfectly with the direction my life had been taking." "I'd be interested in learning more," I replied. "Wonderful." The program would involve creating educational materials for bank employees and possibly presenting at industry conferences. Given your background in marketing and your personal experience, you'd bring a unique perspective. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen island, marveling at how life's trajectories could shift in unexpected ways. 5 years ago, I'd been focused solely on building my marketing career, viewing my mother's financial struggles with a mixture of sympathy and detachment. 3 years ago, I'd been desperately trying to rebuild my credit and my sense of security after a devastating betrayal. Now I was being offered an opportunity to help prevent others from experiencing similar trauma. That afternoon, I called Rachel to share the news about the consulting opportunity. Our friendship had evolved over the years, strengthened by her unwavering support during my darkest moments. "That's amazing, Mel," she exclaimed. "Talk about turning lemons into lemonade." "More like turning lemons into a lemonade business," I laughed. "But yes, it feels right somehow." Using this experience constructively instead of just trying to move past it. "You know what this reminds me of?" Rachel's voice grew thoughtful. "Remember that conversation we had years ago, right after everything happened? You said you weren't sure you'd ever trust anyone with money again. Look at you now, not just healing personally, but helping create systems to protect others." Her observation gave me pause. She was right. I had moved from viewing my experience solely as a personal wound to seeing it as a source of insight that could benefit others. The shift hadn't been immediate or linear, but it had been profound. That evening, I opened my laptop and navigated to the document that had become my memoir manuscript. I'd been stuck on the conclusion for weeks, unsure how to end a story that didn't have a neat resolution. With fresh inspiration, I began to type. Recovery isn't returning to who you were before the wound. It's integrating the experience into a new version of yourself, one who sees both the capacity for betrayal and the potential for growth in human relationships. It's recognizing that trust, once broken, may never be the same, but connection remains possible within new boundaries. My mother took a $70,000 loan in my name and called it a little reminder to be grateful. The phrase still makes me wince, but I've come to recognize a deeper truth within the painful irony. Gratitude can emerge from the most unlikely sources. Not gratitude for the betrayal itself, but for the person I've become through navigating its aftermath. The words flowed easily now, the conclusion taking shape as I articulated what I'd learned through this unwanted journey. I wrote about the difference between forgiveness and trust, about how holding someone accountable could be an act of love, about finding purpose in pain without glorifying suffering. When I finished writing, I felt a sense of completion that had eluded me for months. The manuscript wasn't perfect, but it was honest, a testament to both human frailty and resilience. The following week, I met with my family therapist, Dr. Patterson, for what would be our final scheduled session. Over the past 3 years, our meetings had gradually decreased in frequency as we'd established healthier communication patterns and developed tools for navigating difficult emotions. "How are you feeling about concluding our formal therapy?" she asked as we settled into our usual seats. "Ready," I replied after consideration. 3 years ago, I couldn't imagine having a relationship with my mother that wasn't dominated by either blind trust or complete estrangement. Now we have something that's neither ideal nor broken, just real, with clear boundaries and cautious hope. Dr. Patterson nodded approvingly. That's a remarkably healthy perspective. Many people struggle to accept the messy middle ground of human relationships. I've had good guidance, I acknowledged with a smile. And practical necessity. It's easier to maintain absolute positions in theory than in practice, especially with family. "What about your relationship with yourself?" she asked. "How has that evolved through this process?" The question made me pause. "I'm more protective of my boundaries," I said slowly, "but also more compassionate toward vulnerability, both my own and others. I've learned that resilience isn't about being unbreakable. It's about how you put yourself back together after breaking, and how you use those fracture lines to create something new," Dr. Patterson added. "The Japanese art of kintsugi comes to mind, repairing broken pottery with gold, highlighting the damage rather than hiding it." The metaphor resonated deeply. I hadn't erased the betrayal from my history or pretended it hadn't fundamentally changed me. Instead, I'd incorporated it into a stronger, more conscious version of myself. The golden seams more beautiful for their acknowledgement of brokenness. As I left Dr. Patterson's office for the last time as a regular client, I felt a sense of milestone achievement. Not because everything was perfect or because all wounds had healed without scars, but because I'd learned to carry my experience without being defined by it. That weekend, I attended a financial literacy workshop at the community center, not as a speaker this time, but as a volunteer helping attendees understand credit reports and identity protection. As I guided an elderly woman through the process of freezing her credit, I caught sight of James across the room, giving me an approving nod. 3 years after discovering those fraudulent accounts, my life had found a new equilibrium. The practical impacts had been addressed through diligent work and consistent boundaries. The emotional journey continued, but with increasing moments of peace and purpose. My mother and I spoke weekly, our conversations no longer dominated by the past, but not ignoring it either. Tyler had become an unexpected ally in maintaining family cohesion while respecting individual boundaries. My career had expanded beyond marketing to include advocacy and education around financial abuse prevention. Most significantly, I had found meaning in an experience that once seemed solely destructive. Through my support group facilitation, writing, and emerging consulting work, I was transforming personal pain into communal healing, creating resources I had desperately needed during my own darkest moments. My mother had taken a $70,000 loan in my name and called it a little reminder to be grateful. In the cruel irony of those words, I had eventually found an unexpected truth. Gratitude could emerge not for the harm itself, but for the resilience discovered in its wake. Not for the betrayal, but for the strength, wisdom, and purpose that grew from navigating its aftermath with integrity and courage. This wasn't a happy ending in the conventional sense. Too much had been lost and changed for such simplicity. But it was a meaningful continuation, a testament to the human capacity to create purpose from pain and connection from chaos. And in that ongoing creation, I had found not just recovery, but transformation. 5 years after discovering the fraudulent accounts, my life had settled into a rhythm I never could have imagined during those dark early days. My memoir, Borrowed: Identity, Healing from Familial Financial Abuse, had been published 6 months earlier by a small but respected press specializing in personal narratives about overcoming trauma. The book wasn't a bestseller, but it had found its audience, people struggling with similar betrayals who needed to know they weren't alone. The consulting work with financial institutions had expanded beyond my initial expectations. What began as creating educational materials had evolved into a comprehensive training program now implemented by 3 major banks across the Midwest. I still maintained my marketing career, but had negotiated a flexible schedule that allowed me to pursue this advocacy work alongside my regular job. Most surprisingly, my mother had become an unexpected ally in these educational efforts. After reading an early draft of my memoir, she had offered something I never expected: her perspective as the perpetrator. "People need to understand both sides," she'd said during a phone call that left me speechless. "Not to excuse what I did, but to recognize the warning signs in themselves or others." After careful consideration and consultation with my publisher, we'd added an epilogue to the book, a candid conversation between us about the factors that had led to her decisions and the work she'd done to address her underlying financial trauma and destructive behaviors. This morning, we were scheduled to appear together at a financial literacy conference in Indianapolis, our first joint public speaking engagement. As I waited in the hotel lobby for her to arrive, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this unlikely collaboration. The healing hadn't been linear or perfect. There had been setbacks, moments of resentment that surfaced unexpectedly, tense conversations that ended in hurt feelings, occasional missed payments during the repayment period that triggered old anxieties. But the overall trajectory had been toward greater understanding and carefully defined connection. My mother arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in a professional blue suit I'd never seen before. She'd aged visibly in the past 5 years, but there was a steadiness in her demeanor that hadn't been present during the chaotic period surrounding her identity theft confession. "Nervous?" I asked as we walked toward the conference room. "Terrified," she admitted with a wry smile. "But it feels right." Using our story, even the ugliest parts, to help others avoid similar mistakes. The panel discussion was scheduled for 90 minutes with 3 other speakers: a bank security expert, a family therapist specializing in financial conflicts, and a lawyer with expertise in identity theft cases. I would speak first about my experience as a victim, followed by expert commentary, and then my mother would share her perspective on what had led to her desperate decision and her journey toward accountability. The audience was larger than I'd expected. Nearly 100 financial professionals, counselors, and social workers. As I approached the podium, I felt the familiar flutter of nerves, but it dissipated as I began to speak. After 5 years of processing my experience through writing and smaller presentations, the narrative flowed naturally. I spoke about the initial discovery, the devastating impact on my financial security and emotional well-being, the difficult decision to file a police report against my own mother, and the long process of rebuilding both my credit and my sense of safety in the world. The most insidious aspect of familial financial abuse, I concluded, is how it weaponizes love and obligation. When a stranger steals your identity, the path forward is clear. When it's someone you love, every decision becomes clouded by loyalty, history, and the natural human desire to preserve important relationships. My journey taught me that accountability and compassion can coexist, that setting firm boundaries is sometimes the most loving choice you can make, both for yourself and for the person who harmed you. When my mother took the stage 30 minutes. Later, after the expert commentaries, I watched the audience's reaction carefully. There was visible tension as she introduced herself as the mother who took out $70,000 in loans using my daughter's identity. Some people shifted, uncomfortably in their seats, while others leaned forward with clinical interest. "I'm not here to defend what I did," she began clearly. "There is no justification for betraying my daughter's trust and jeopardizing her future. But I am here to help you understand the mindset that makes such betrayal seem rational in the moment. Because understanding is the first step toward prevention." She spoke candidly about growing up with financially irresponsible parents who had declared bankruptcy twice before she finished high school, about watching bill collectors repossess furniture and vehicles, about the profound scarcity mindset that had developed as a result, the panic that set in whenever financial challenges arose, the shame that prevented her from seeking legitimate help, the rationalization that family resources were communal rather than individual. "None of this excuses my actions," she emphasized. "But recognizing these patterns might help you identify similar vulnerabilities in clients, patients, or loved ones before a crisis drives them to desperate measures." As she described her experience with court-mandated financial counseling and voluntary therapy, I noticed several audience members taking detailed notes. Her perspective as someone who had committed financial abuse and subsequently done the difficult work of confronting harmful patterns was relatively rare in these professional contexts. The most powerful moment came during the Q&A session, when someone asked how our relationship had survived such a fundamental breach of trust. My mother glanced at me before answering. "I'm not sure survived is the right word. The relationship we had before is gone. What exists now is something entirely new, built on painful honesty rather than comfortable illusions. I had to accept that I might lose my daughter entirely, and that would have been a natural consequence of my actions. The fact that we've created a different kind of relationship is a testament to her strength, not my worthiness." Her words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. She had articulated something I'd felt, but never fully expressed, that what existed between us now wasn't a repaired version of our former relationship, but something fundamentally different, with both limitations and unique strengths born from. Confronting difficult truths. After the panel concluded, several attendees approached us with questions and comments. A bank manager asked for additional resources to help frontline staff recognize warning signs of familial financial exploitation. A social worker shared a case she was currently handling, seeking guidance on how to support the victim through the reporting process. A counselor asked about the specific therapeutic approaches that had been most helpful in our individual and family healing. As we fielded these questions together, I experienced a moment of surreal clarity. This painful chapter that had once felt like the end of everything had transformed into a source of knowledge that could help others navigate similar terrain. The betrayal hadn't been erased or excused, but it had been integrated into a larger narrative of growth and purpose. That evening, Tyler joined us for dinner at a restaurant near the conference center. At 32, my brother had matured into a steadier version of himself. He'd completed an associate's degree in automotive technology, secured a stable position at a respected repair shop, and recently purchased his first home, a small but well-maintained ranch house he was renovating. Himself. "How did it go today?" he asked, genuinely interested in our presentation. As we shared highlights from the conference, I observed the ease with which the three of us now interacted, a stark contrast to the tension and recrimination that had characterized our family dynamics in the aftermath of the identity theft revelation. The healing hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been without setbacks, But sitting here now, it was undeniable that something fundamental had shifted. "I have some news," Tyler said after our meals arrived. "I've been approved to become a foster parent." This announcement took us both by surprise. Tyler had mentioned considering fostering during a family gathering several months earlier, but I hadn't realized he'd proceeded with the application process. "That's wonderful," I said sincerely. "What made you decide to move forward with it?" "Honestly, all of this." He gestured vaguely between my mother and me. "Watching how you both handled everything, Mel being firm about boundaries but still open to repair, Mom doing the hard work of confronting her issues instead of running from them. It made me think about what family really means, about breaking cycles." My mother reached across the table to squeeze his hand, visibly moved by his words. "My home study is scheduled for next month," he continued. "Then there's more training before I could receive a placement. But the agency is especially looking for homes for teenagers, which feels right to me." As he shared more details about the fostering process, I felt a profound appreciation for how our family trauma had rippled outward in unexpected ways. Tyler's decision to provide a stable home for vulnerable youth represented another form of healing. Not just personal recovery, but a commitment to creating something better for the next generation. The following morning, before returning to Chicago, I met my mother for breakfast at the hotel restaurant. There was something I'd been considering for months, but hadn't found the right moment to discuss. "I've been thinking about the house," I began, referring to the property she had signed over to me years earlier as part of her amends. "I'd like to transfer it back to you." She set down her coffee cup, clearly surprised. "Melissa, that's not necessary. It was part of making things right." "I know. And it mattered at the time. It showed me you were serious about accountability. But things are different now. The debt is paid. You've maintained your financial recovery for years. And honestly, I don't need or want to be your landlord indefinitely." She considered this, brow furrowed. "Are you sure? It's the only real asset I have to leave you and Tyler eventually." "I'm sure. We can work with Sandra to set up the transfer." I paused, then added, "It's not about erasing what happened. It's about acknowledging we're in a different place now." The relief and gratitude in her eyes told me it was the right decision. The house transfer had served its purpose during a critical phase of our recovery, providing security for me and structure for her. But continuing the arrangement indefinitely no longer matched where we stood in our healing journey. As we parted, at the airport, our hug was longer and less guarded than usual. "Thank you for today," she said quietly. "For being willing to share our story, even the ugliest parts." "It helps to give it meaning," I replied honestly. "To know some good can come from it." On the flight back to Chicago, I found myself reflecting on the concept of recovery. 5 years earlier, in the raw aftermath of discovery, I had imagined recovery as a return to how things were before. My good credit restored, my sense of security reestablished, my relationship with my mother repaired to its former state. But true recovery had proven to be something entirely different. Not a restoration of what was lost, but the creation of something new from the broken pieces. My credit score was actually higher now than before the identity theft, having learned to manage my finances with heightened awareness. My sense of security was rooted in self-trust rather than external circumstances. And my relationship with my mother, while irreversibly altered, contained an honesty and mutual respect that our previous dynamic had lacked. The memoir had been another unexpected aspect of recovery. Writing had begun as a private processing tool, a way to make sense of my experience when the emotions felt too complex to articulate aloud. Sharing that writing publicly had initially felt vulnerable, but the responses from readers navigating similar terrain had confirmed the value of breaking the silence that typically surrounded familial financial abuse. Several literary agents had recently approached me about a follow-up book focusing on recovery strategies for victims of various forms of financial exploitation. The project interested me, though I was cautious about being permanently defined by this single chapter of my life, however transformative it had been. My phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus, who had become a close friend in the years. Since I'd mentored him through his own identity theft ordeal, just saw your conference was covered by the local paper. Mother-daughter team tackles financial abuse taboos. Look at you, changing the world one bank training at a time. I smiled at his enthusiasm. Marcus had followed a parallel path in many ways, channeling his experience into advocacy work while rebuilding his own financial stability. We often joked about forming a survivors club, though the gallows humor masked a genuine appreciation for having someone who truly understood the unique complexities of familial financial betrayal. Landing. In Chicago, I felt the familiar comfort of returning to the life I'd built for myself in the aftermath of crisis. My condo with its carefully chosen furnishings. My career with its expanding focus on advocacy alongside marketing. My chosen family of friends who had supported me through the darkest periods and celebrated each milestone of recovery. That evening, I received an email from the conference organizer, Melissa. I cannot thank you and your mother enough for your powerful presentation today. The evaluations have been overwhelmingly positive, with multiple attendees describing your session as transformative and perspective-changing. 3 banks have already requested information about your training program, and the State Financial Literacy Coordinator has asked about the possibility of incorporating elements of your presentation into their education initiatives. Would you be open to discussing the development of a more comprehensive curriculum based on your experience and expertise? I believe there's significant potential to expand this work beyond our region. Warmly, Eleanor Hamilton, Conference Director. The request represented yet another unexpected doorway opening from what had once seemed like a dead end. 5 years ago, I couldn't have imagined that my most painful experience would ultimately lead to professional opportunities to prevent others from suffering similar harm. As I drafted a positive response to Eleanor, I reflected on how thoroughly my perspective had shifted since those early days of devastation and betrayal. The identity theft hadn't defined me, but my response to it had revealed aspects of my character and capabilities I might never have discovered otherwise. My mother had taken a $70,000 loan in my name and called it a little reminder to be grateful. The phrase no longer stung as it once had, having been examined and processed countless times through therapy, writing, and public speaking. But it remained a touchstone, a reminder of how profoundly our lives can be altered by both harm and healing. In the cruel irony of those words, I had indeed found unexpected gratitude, not for the betrayal itself, but for the person I had become, through navigating its aftermath. For the boundaries I had learned to establish, for the authenticity I had discovered in speaking painful truths, for the meaning I had created from suffering, for the community I had found among other survivors, for the work that now allowed me to transform personal trauma into public good. This wasn't a story with a traditional happy ending. Too much had been lost and changed for such simplicity. But it was a story of profound human resilience and the capacity to create purpose from pain, connection from betrayal, wisdom from wound. And in that ongoing creation, I had found not just recovery, but a life richer in meaning and authenticity than I could have imagined in the time before everything broke apart and was reassembled into something new. 10 years after discovering those fraudulent accounts, I stood at the podium of a national financial literacy conference in Washington, D.C., surveying the audience of over 500 financial professionals, educators, advocates, and policymakers. The journey from that devastating moment at the bank to this keynote address had been neither straight nor simple, but it had led to a place I never could have imagined during those dark early days. A decade ago, I began, I learned that my mother had taken out $70,000 in loans using my identity. When confronted, she called it a little reminder to be grateful for everything she had done for me. A murmur rippled through the audience, some familiar with my story through my books and educational programs, others hearing it for the first time. That cruel phrase became the title of my first memoir, not because I accepted its premise, but because it represented everything wrong with how we discuss financial boundaries in families. Today, I want to talk about what a decade of working with survivors of familial financial abuse has taught me about prevention, intervention, and recovery. The presentation I delivered summarized the evolution of my work since those early days of personal crisis. What had begun as a private healing journey had expanded into a national advocacy organization, the Center for Financial Relationship Health, which now employed a staff of 12 and offered resources to thousands of victims annually. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.